There's a pregnant woman on the plane who's going into premature labor and urgently needs medical assistance. I rushed over immediately. After some resuscitation efforts, both the mother and child were safe, but unfortunately, the baby had unusually short legs. However, when the mother saw the baby's legs, she suddenly began cursing at me.
"You incompetent doctor! You must have pulled too hard during the delivery and broken my baby's legs."
Without giving me a chance to explain, she thrust a dinner knife into my neck. Even after I died, she took advantage of the lack of evidence to slander me, falsely claiming that I, a bone specialist, intentionally harmed someone during an obstetric emergency. She profited from her fabricated story, while my parents died in the process of trying to clear my name. When I opened my eyes again, I was back at the moment when the flight attendants were broadcasting a request for medical personnel. This time, I pretended not to hear it. My family's 3 lives, she used 2 to repay me, and that was still too light a price. Respected passengers, we interrupt your service with an urgent message. There is a pregnant woman in economy class who is experiencing severe abdominal pain and requires immediate assistance. If there are any medical personnel on board, please contact the flight attendants immediately. As I heard this announcement again, my eyes snapped open from my feigned sleep. After taking in my surroundings, I instinctively touched my neck. Realizing it was smooth as before, I drew a sharp breath. I never expected that I would be reborn. In my previous life, I had also heard the announcement while pretending to sleep on the plane. Because there was a major traffic accident in a neighboring city, I was urgently called in to perform emergency surgery. But at that moment, I was exhausted from just finishing a night shift. Right now, I was using the 3 hours on the plane to rest desperately. However, when I heard the announcement, I immediately got up and rushed over as a medical professional. By the time I arrived, the pregnant woman was already pale from pain. I explained to her and her family that I was not a specialist, but she still gripped my hand, pleading for help. "Doctor, please save me. Even if you're not an obstetrician, you're better than nothing." As I hesitated, she showed another wave of pain. Her dress was gradually soaked by amniotic fluid. I made her lie flat and, after removing her pants, discovered that the baby's dark hair was already visible. I decided to start delivering the baby right away. Just as the baby's shoulders emerged, I felt some relief. Even though this was a premature birth, as long as the delivery went smoothly, the baby could be sent to the hospital once the plane landed, giving him a chance of survival. But when I saw the baby's legs, my pupils constricted sharply. The baby's legs were unusually short. As an experienced orthopedic specialist, I knew this was a congenital deformity. The period for major prenatal testing was between 22 and 26 weeks, and this woman was already past that. Assuming she had a reason for keeping the baby, I tried to offer some comfort. But before I could speak, she changed color after seeing the baby's legs and began cursing me, grabbing my wrist.
"You're a lousy doctor. You must have pulled too hard and broken my baby's legs."
I was taken aback. What did this have to do with me? She was clearly talking nonsense. Facing the strange glances of nearby passengers, I quickly explained.
"The baby obviously had a congenital deformity which should have been indicated in prenatal tests."
Upon hearing this, she paused for a moment, a fleeting hint of guilt crossing her face. Then, she flipped over and knocked me to the ground, cursing viciously.
"It has nothing to do with prenatal tests. You're just unskilled."
"Give me back my baby." I struggled back, but my neck suddenly felt severe pain, and before I knew it, I lost consciousness. When others pulled us apart, they found a dinner knife lodged in my neck, and I had long since stopped breathing. Only then did I realize I had died. The police quickly subdued her and isolated her with her child, given that she had just given birth. She was laughing and crying while holding her child with deformed legs, appearing crazed.
"Prenatal tests are just tricks used by hospitals. My perfect baby couldn't possibly have been born with a deformity because my husband and I have excellent genes."
As a spirit, I was consumed with anger, realizing why she was so shocked by the deformed child. She hadn't even had prenatal tests. She was framing me on purpose. Then, I watched as she removed the blanket from the child, exposing the tiny baby to the air. Freshly born premature babies are not fully developed and would need to be in an incubator at a hospital to survive. Her action was clearly intended to cause the child to die from hypothermia. Indeed, before the plane landed, the baby stopped breathing. Although I felt sorry for the baby, I believed justice would prevail eventually. The forensic examination would reveal the truth. Despite the baby's death, the deformity was congenital and unrelated to my assistance. The police would eventually prove my innocence and bring the real culprit to justice. However, once the plane landed, the woman changed her story. She was crying and rolling on the ground with the dead baby. It's all because of that incompetent doctor. If she hadn't delivered my baby, he would still be alive. Hearing her words, my spirit froze for a moment. So, this was her plan, using my death to cover up the truth. A huge controversy erupted online, with countless people slandering me without knowing the facts. The airline remained silent to avoid liability, and the hospital removed me from their records to protect their reputation. Only my parents continued to prove my innocence by seeking out witnesses from the flight. During one of their outings, they were followed by extreme netizens and tragically set on fire in their home. Overcome with anger and grief, I realized there was nothing I could do. Meanwhile, the woman hired a lawyer to claim innocence. Her relatives exploited this incident for their live streams, making a fortune. Consumed by sorrow and anger, a flash of white light swept over me, and when I opened my eyes again, I found myself back at the moment when the flight attendants were asking for medical assistance. This time, I wouldn't intervene. Such heartless people deserve to suffer for their actions. After calming down, I closed my eyes again. The broadcast continued, but no one in the cabin volunteered to help. I smiled wryly at myself. Given the large-scale traffic accident in the neighboring city, many medical workers were dispatched from our city alone, and I doubted I was the only medical professional on the plane. At the end of the day, people were just afraid of getting involved. 2 flight attendants rushed past me, exclaiming,
What should we do? There isn't a single medical professional.
Another attendant, although visibly stressed, managed to keep her voice steady. We'll follow emergency procedures. The woman was showing signs of distress before boarding, but she insisted she was fine. We've done our part, now we'll have to leave it up to fate. Just then, a heart-wrenching scream came from the front cabin.
It hurts so much. Someone help me.
The attendants exchanged glances and hurried forward with a medical kit. 5 minutes later, one of them returned, covered in blood, to call for help again. Is there anyone with relevant emergency experience? The woman is hemorrhaging and needs assistance. Seeing the blood, my heart, which had been detached, began to grow anxious. The young woman behind me started complaining.
Doesn't she have any sense? She knew she wasn't feeling well but still got on the plane. Now we're stuck with this mess.
The older lady beside her slapped her hand.
What are you talking about? This is a matter of life and death.
The young girl grumbled.
What's the big deal about someone's life? She's just bringing this on herself. For someone like that, even if there were medical personnel, they wouldn't step forward. What if it blows back on them?
My initially anxious heart suddenly calmed down. Yes, what if it did? Last time, I didn't lose my life because of this, did I? Respect others' destinies and don't interfere with their karma. With that thought, I continued to pretend to sleep. Just at that moment, a flight attendant grabbed my arm and shouted, "Dr. Wilson, the patient is critically ill and needs your urgent care." I was startled by her words. How did the airline staff find out my real identity? This time around, I will not repeat the same mistake. I took a deep breath and slowly opened my eyes. Looking at the flight attendant, I feigned confusion and said,
Hello, I'm Dr. Wilson. What's the situation?
She didn't have time to investigate whether I was really sleeping or just pretending, and she urged, I saw your registered profession. There's a pregnant woman in front who needs your help urgently. My gaze fell on the registration paper, and I clenched my fists. This morning, after a night shift, I encountered an emergency rescue during my commute to the airport. I received a call for an emergency surgery just as I was leaving the operating table. To avoid delaying the rescue for the patient in the neighboring city, I quickly registered my profession with the airline staff and used the expedited channel. Originally, I wanted to stay out of it, but it seems that's not possible now. However, I won't be intimidated. Since I haven't done anything wrong, I'll just adapt to the situation. A look of urgency appeared on my face as I unbuckled my seatbelt and followed the flight attendant.
Sorry, I worked all night and was asleep. Can you tell me what's happening?
The flight attendant briefly explained the situation with the pregnant woman, which was mostly the same as before. The only difference was that this time, due to delayed intervention, the woman was experiencing severe bleeding. By the time I arrived at the economy cabin, her amniotic fluid and blood were mixed together. Seeing her pale face made my heart throb with anxiety. Responding to the flight attendant's calls, I put on gloves and began a simple examination. The pregnant woman wailed, "Doctor, please save me and my child. He hasn't seen the world yet." As she became agitated, another burst of blood came. Her husband seized my arm, shaking it violently. "You must save my wife and son." I suppressed the anger in my eyes. In my previous life, the husband was in the restroom when I arrived to help, and everything had happened by the time he returned. However, he wasn't innocent. After finding out about the woman's actions against me, he directed public opinion to continue slandering me upon landing. If it weren't for him, my parents might not have been killed by extreme netizens. Every time someone defended me, he would hire people to manipulate public opinion. I suppressed my anger and said urgently,
Where's the prenatal test report? Let me see the fetal condition.
Upon hearing this, the pregnant woman gripped my hand tightly. She snarled,
What are you doing looking at prenatal reports at this time? You need to hurry up and save me and my child.
She continued to wail, I'm going to die from the pain." I skillfully freed my arm from her grasp and told her husband and the flight attendants, "I'm not an obstetrician. Without the prenatal report, I can't assess the fetal position or situation, so I really can't help much." After saying that, I prepared to stand up and leave. However, her husband suddenly grabbed my hand and wouldn't let me go. "You can't leave. You have to save her." I bowed to him. "I'm truly sorry, medical specialties are specialized. I don't understand obstetrics, and I fear intervening could harm the woman and child." Hearing this, the woman began to cry. "Oh, my baby, we're so unlucky. How did we meet such an inhumane doctor? Without the prenatal report, she's just going to watch us die." Some passengers looked at me with incomprehension. I shouted loudly, "Prenatal reports can help determine the fetal age. If you've reached term, you can deliver, but if it's too early, you should prioritize preserving the pregnancy." She quickly replied, "I'm 36 weeks into my pregnancy, and my due date is next month. Delivering now should be fine." I examined her abdomen and expressed my doubts. "You said you're 36 weeks pregnant, but your uterus and belly size don't match those of a 36-week pregnancy." This wasn't a lie. Last time, I thought her small belly was due to her being thin, but after delivering the baby, I understood. Because the baby had short, deformed legs, the size was more like a 30-week pregnancy. Seeing that I wouldn't act without the prenatal report, she suddenly changed her tone and began cursing me, "You're just looking for excuses not to help us. Why did you only come now?" The husband intervened, "I'm going to sue you. You're playing with people's lives. If you don't save my wife and son today, once we land, you won't be able to walk away." I remained unfazed and explained calmly, "I've already explained the situation. I'm not an obstetrician, and if I intervene without understanding the full situation, that would be irresponsible. Right now, you need to calm down and reduce bleeding to hold out until the plane lands." However, someone as malicious as her wouldn't listen. Hearing my words, she became even more agitated, with her blanket covered in growing bloodstains. Due to excessive blood loss, her face turned pale like paper. The husband grasped my hand firmly. "Today, you have to save them whether you want to or not. If my wife and son have any problems, I'll make you pay." Passengers turned their heads toward us. Some people spoke up for me. "He said he isn't a specialist. If he's not professional, intervening could make things worse. How can't you understand that? He's also being responsible as a doctor." However, the husband wouldn't listen and kept pulling me back. At that moment, a flight attendant came over to comfort the woman. "Just hold on for a bit longer. We're accelerating the landing process, and the plane is about to descend." Upon hearing this, the woman's veins bulged, and with one strong push, she delivered the baby. She herself, however, rolled her eyes back and lost consciousness. I approached to check her vital signs and found she had passed out due to exhaustion and excessive blood loss. I sighed quietly. She was indeed very resilient. Seeing the plane land, as long as she was taken to the hospital promptly, she and the baby should be fine. The husband went to pick up the baby, but upon seeing its deformed legs, he pushed me to the ground. "You wicked person! My son's legs must have become like this because you delayed. Give me back my son's health." Last time, because I protected myself during the delivery, my conversation with the woman didn't draw any attention, even avoiding curious glances from other passengers since they didn't know about the deformity. But this time was different. Due to the couple's arguing, everyone in economy class, including the flight attendants, knew about the deformed baby. As I fell to the ground, the tiny baby was exposed to everyone. A little boy saw the deformed legs and cried loudly. "Mom, that little brother is a monster." The already furious husband glared at the child, who hid in his mother's arms. The child's mother began to reason with him.
People who have given birth know this is a congenital deformity. Prenatal tests would have indicated it. If you chose to keep the baby, you have to accept this.
His face turned white and green as he glared at me again.
This is your fault. Don't try to shift the blame to prenatal tests.
A cold smile rose in my heart. Mad dogs are mad dogs, they'll harm you whether you help or not. But this time, I'm alive and won't let him continue slandering me. Just then, a flight attendant reminded me that the plane was about to land and told me to return to my seat. In front of everyone, I
kindly
reminded them again.
The critical period for major fetal deformity testing is between 22 and 24 weeks. If your medical reports really didn't indicate anything, you can go back to the hospital and file a complaint.
He became even angrier after hearing my words, his furious gaze seemingly wanting to devour me. The flight attendants were perplexed, but I knew the truth. The couple had never done prenatal tests, so they had only themselves to blame. As I returned to my seat to gather my belongings, the flight attendants announced it was time to disembark. Reflecting on my mission, I put the couple out of my mind and hurried forward. There was still a patient with a spinal injury from a car accident who urgently needed my surgery to survive. Upon reaching the exit, I saw someone holding a sign with my name, shouting,
"Dr. Wilson! Who is Dr. Wilson?"
"Seeing People's Hospital." On the sign, I confirmed my identity and prepared to leave. At the same time, an ambulance sped by. If I wasn't mistaken, it should contain the family from the plane. Watching the flashing lights of the ambulance, I let out a sigh of relief. I finally escaped fate, and we won't have any more interaction. But unexpectedly, I was grabbed by someone at the hospital parking lot entrance. Turning back, I saw it was the husband of the pregnant woman. "Wilson! You're a murderous doctor who doesn't care about human lives. You won't be going anywhere until you give me an explanation today." My expression turned cold. This man just wouldn't quit. Thinking of the patient waiting for me to save their life, I tried to shake off his hand. Noticing my intent, he sneered. "My wife is in the operating room fighting for her life, and my son is deformed because of your delay. How can you expect to escape perfectly unscathed? You're dreaming. Even after being reborn, I never expected him to be so shameless. I rebuked him angrily. I've explained it clearly. Your wife and son's situation has nothing to do with me. Why won't you leave me alone?
I'm in a hurry to save someone else right now. Don't you know that every minute counts?
My words were no threat. In my previous life, because of my accident, the patient I was supposed to save ended up dying. Since I was reborn, I wouldn't let that happen again. However, when he heard this, instead of letting go, he gripped my hand even tighter.
What does saving someone else have to do with me? My son's birth defect has ruined my life, don't you understand?
I looked at my watch and spoke urgently. What do you want? I'm not a miracle worker, I can't give you a healthy son. He smiled with a hint of malice. I know doctors are rich. I won't ask for much, just give me $1 million and we'll settle this. Hearing this, I was shocked for a moment and laughed coldly.
You're blackmailing me. Not only is your son's deformity unrelated to me, but even if it were, it would need a court ruling, not your word. I'm warning you, if you don't let go, I'll call security.
He looked at me with a flash of anger and slapped me to the ground.
You audacious woman, you're really shameless, aren't you?
Listen up, if I don't see any money today, you won't be able to leave. You were so eager to save that person, but you didn't seem so urgent when saving my wife. That person must have paid you well, right? He became increasingly agitated and kicked me a few times. Already dazed from the slap, I couldn't dodge and endured the kicks. I struggled to cry for help, and it was only when the patrolling security guards heard me that they came to my rescue. The driver who was picking me up also ran out from the parking lot, shocked by my condition.
Dr. Wilson, what happened?
I weakly pointed at the man and said, Quickly call the police, he's the assailant. Upon hearing I would report him to the police, the thug ran away. The driver wanted to chase after him, but I stopped him. Let's go. There's surveillance, he can't escape. First, let's go save the patient. So, I hobbled to the operating room despite the dizziness. The waiting doctors were surprised by my appearance. I tried to wave my hand to indicate I was okay, but my right wrist wouldn't budge. Cold sweat flowed down my forehead. I had carefully reviewed the patient's records on my phone during the ride. The patient had severe spinal cord damage and required immediate decompression surgery to avoid risking their life. The surgery required high manual dexterity, and only I and my teacher could perform it in the entire province. My teacher was nearing retirement, so I was the only one capable of doing the operation. But now, my wrist was injured and unable to move. This meant that the patient's last hope was gone. A nurse helping me with the surgical gown noticed my distress and asked,
Dr. Wilson, what's wrong?
I smiled bitterly and held out my right hand helplessly.
I might not be able to perform the surgery. My wrist can't move.
The entire operating room erupted at once. Dr. Ethan Thompson, the chief physician, was worried.
The patient's family has been calling many times. If they find out the truth, they might not take it well.
I sighed.
It's because of me, so I'll go explain to the family.
No one wants to see their loved one die when they could be saved. Watching the unconscious elderly man on the surgical bed, I vowed to make that man pay. Thinking about the impending encounter, I took a deep breath. Just as I stepped out of the operating room, I heard a familiar voice outside.
As soon as grandfather got sick, our Jessica got on a plane despite being pregnant. It's a wonder she didn't give birth on the plane. We'll be rewarded for our filial piety. Once grandfather recovers, he must give us another house.
I looked up to see it was that scoundrel again. My anger suddenly found an outlet, and I threw the medical records at him.
You murderer! Today, I'm reporting you to the police.
Seeing it was me, he was taken aback for a moment before dodging and screaming.
Help! The doctor is attacking me.
I wanted to chase after him, but my colleagues held me back. He hid behind an older man, shouting,
Uncle, save me! This female doctor wants my life.
The older man, William Jackson, had a stern expression and snarled at Dr. Thompson.
Dr. Thompson, why aren't you doing anything? Your hospital doctors are more concerned with pursuing my nephew instead of saving lives. Is this how it should be?
Dr. Thompson's face was grim as he explained.
William Jackson, it's not that we don't want to save lives. It's just that the doctor who was supposed to perform the surgery was injured by someone and can no longer do it.
William Jackson's face changed, and he shouted angrily.
Who injured the doctor? I'll make sure they pay for it.
I smiled coldly. It seemed this family loved using that phrase. I pointed at the man hiding behind him.
It was him. He hurt my hand.
William Jackson's expression faltered, and he slapped the man on the face.
Bradley Jackson, what's going on here?
Bradley shouted at me.
You are lying. The specialist who was supposed to operate on my father is the deputy director of the provincial hospital, not you.
Just then, a nurse rushed out from the operating room, saying,
George Jackson's family, please come quickly. The patient is in critical condition.
Bradley's face went pale, and he knelt down, shouting.
They said doing the surgery would save him. How could he suddenly worsen?
I stepped forward and slapped him again. Your father's death is because of you. If you hadn't wasted time and injured my hand, your father might not have died. Bradley looked stunned, muttering.
What was all this struggle for? The inheritance hasn't even been divided yet, and now my dad is dead.
I looked at him with disdain. No wonder they boarded the plane despite being unwell. They were waiting for the old man to pass away and divide the inheritance. William Jackson, who was closest to him, also heard this and immediately kicked Bradley out.
Get out.
Your father said before he passed that I would distribute his inheritance. Let me make one thing clear, you won't get a single penny. Bradley tried to cause more trouble, but by then, the police I called had arrived. Since the surveillance had captured his assault, he was handcuffed. Seeing the police, he was truly frightened and pleaded for mercy. He was arrested, and with that, the ordeal finally ended. Dr. Wilson, I was wrong. Please forgive me. I can compensate, I'll give more money. Is that okay? I have a wife and kids to take care of. If I really get arrested, what will happen to them? I moved my wrist, which was injured, and said coldly. Don't explain this to me. You should apologize to your father. It's up to the law, I won't say another word. By evening, the court's decision regarding Bradley's punishment was announced. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison for assaulting someone. However, because his wife and child needed care at the hospital and he showed remorse, the judge ruled that he would pay me $100,000 immediately and be released on probation. Since my wrist was injured, I had to take a long leave. The hospital took responsibility for what happened there and insisted that I recover fully before leaving. Worried that my parents would worry if they saw my condition, I submitted a leave request under the guise of going abroad for an exchange and stayed temporarily at the hospital. Just as I thought the matter was over, public opinion on the internet turned against me. Famous expert sees death and does nothing, pregnant woman and baby's lives hang in the balance. The photo showed my work ID and the pregnant woman being wheeled off the plane covered in blood. Some people don't deserve to be doctors. They knew the patient was in danger but pretended to sleep. If she hadn't delayed treatment, my wife wouldn't have had a severe hemorrhage, had her uterus removed, and still be unconscious. Seeing this operation, which was identical to what happened in my previous life, I knew Bradley was up to no good again. However, he didn't know that in my previous life, I allowed him to slander me because I was the only one who knew the truth and I had died. But this time, not only was I alive, but passengers and flight attendants on the plane also knew the whole story. He couldn't pull the same trick as before. His account quickly blew up. There were indeed people who didn't know the facts and cursed at me, but many others stood up for me. As a passenger on the plane, if I wasn't there, I would have believed his lies. Dr. Wilson acted calmly and wasn't neglectful as he said. I searched her background on Wikipedia. Dr. Wilson is a renowned orthopedic specialist. An orthopedic doctor shouldn't intervene in obstetrics without expertise, that would be malpractice. I'm a flight attendant. When the pregnant woman boarded, she said she wasn't feeling well. We advised against it, but the couple insisted on flying. Netizens responded. They're just blaming others for their own mistakes.
What nerve!
I heard from my cousin that the baby was born with deformed legs, and this guy still wanted to blame it all on Dr. Wilson. If they didn't do prenatal tests, they would have known it was deformed. It's not like they didn't have brains or money. Seeing this comment, I smiled slightly. Netizens had seen right through it. However, Bradley refused to give up. He hired an online army to curse at me relentlessly. Why didn't Dr. Wilson appear initially? Wasn't she just pretending to sleep? A doctor, no matter how little they know about obstetrics, should still help more than a regular person. Why didn't she intervene initially? Seeing this, I lost my temper and personally posted a statement. I'm Emily Wilson. Given the scale of this incident, I want to clarify. First, when the situation happened, I was asleep because I had been operating all night and had another major surgery immediately after landing. I wasn't pretending to sleep or neglecting anyone in distress. Second, asking for the prenatal report wasn't about delaying. As a medical professional, I was adhering to medical principles. I've worked in orthopedics for over a decade and lack experience with deliveries. Without the report, how could I diagnose properly? Moreover, the pregnant woman's uterine size and abdominal circumference didn't match her reported gestational age. As a knowledgeable medical professional, doing nothing was the correct choice. After I posted this, some colleagues also spoke up for me. Luckily, Dr. Wilson didn't intervene, or it would have been considered unauthorized practice. Our licenses tell us not to practice outside our designated areas. Seeing no effect, Bradley organized journalists to visit the pregnant woman at the hospital, aiming to play the victim and salvage their image. 4 days had passed since the incident. During these 4 days, the woman, Jessica, had remained unconscious. Coincidentally, on the day journalists came to see her, she woke up. To avoid disturbing her, Bradley had the reporters hide outside. To stage a better show, he also brought the newborn over to her ward. When I arrived, Jessica was complaining to Bradley. It wouldn't have happened if you hadn't insisted on more inheritance. I wouldn't have taken that abortion pill, and our child wouldn't be deformed. I don't want this child. Hearing this, Bradley was frantic but couldn't speak openly with reporters outside. He quietly guided her. We have hands and feet, I know you're hurt, but if we don't want the child, what will happen to it? Jessica looked at him with disgust. Are you stupid? We should either kill it or blame it on that doctor. You're missing out on a free ride. Bradley's face turned pale. Jessica, seeing his reaction, sneered even more. You wouldn't feel bad about it, would you? This deformed child won't get anything from your dad. Let's just get rid of it and have another. At that moment, the reporters outside couldn't help but burst in. You call yourself a mother? You're considering murdering your own child. And you're trying to blame it all on Dr. Wilson? Do you think everyone is a fool? Jessica was stunned. She gripped Bradley, asking, What's going on? Why are there reporters here? Bradley's face was grim, but he still tried to defend himself. Everyone, calm down. My wife just woke up, she's not fully aware of her words. Don't take them seriously. Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh coldly. Jessica only then noticed me in the room. She was terrified, saying, You're not dead. How can you still be alive? A young journalist stepped forward and scolded her.
Ugh, what kind of person are you? You dared to curse Dr. Wilson.
I had a hunch, maybe she had also been reborn. After hearing the journalist, she reacted and pointed at me, yelling,
You lousy doctor. Did you call these reporters to set a trap for us?
I pulled out my phone and showed them something.
I've already called the police. If you have anything to say, save it for the police station.
The woman laughed.
Go ahead and call them. My husband's uncle is a bureau chief. We have connections. See if you can do anything to us.
As she said this, she was slapped by Bradley.
Fool! Are you trying to get yourself killed?
She stared at him in disbelief, her eyes wide open.
Husband, how can you hit me? I didn't say anything wrong. Even if your uncle can't pull strings, my dad has money to bail us out.
I said coldly. Forget that everyone is equal before the law, even with connections, you can't use them this time.
You woke up late, so you probably don't know. Your father-in-law has been killed by your husband, and your brother-in-law has disowned him. All that awaits you is legal punishment.
The young journalist pointed to the camera and smiled.
Mr. Jackson requested a live broadcast. By now, the whole city knows about your connections.
The woman looked at Bradley, then at the baby in her hand, shaking her head and muttering to herself.
It's not supposed to be like this. I still have public support. I was supposed to have a lot of money.
When the police came to arrest her, she refused and tried to escape but fell down the stairs and died. Bradley was arrested and sent to prison for violating the law again. The deformed baby was taken in by the Jacksons, but due to severe congenital defects from toxins, the child didn't live past its first birthday. I learned this news from a journalist following up on the story. At that time, I was traveling with my parents. On the return flight, I encountered another patient who was vomiting severely, but after confirming their condition wasn't serious, I didn't step forward. This path of medicine is difficult indeed. Even in a white coat, I am still human first. The only thing I can do is be cautious and do what aligns with my principles. Often, the only one who can protect yourself is you. And by protecting yourself, you can save more people.